There it is. And okay, my name is Jace Nunes, and I'm with the Citrus Heights Water District. First off, I just wanted to let everybody know that we are revitalizing our customer advisory committee, and we are now accepting applications. So if you would like to join, the deadline is October 1st, and it's a good opportunity where you can really learn a lot about the district and what we do here at Citrus Heights. Bernadette, can you do the next slide? Thank you. And so just before we get into our Water Smart class, Plant into the Hydrozone for Healthy Plant and Water Savings, I want to remind everybody that this class will be posted on our YouTube. And you can also go to our website and access our classes as well. It just links to our YouTube. Other than that, I wanted to advertise some programs that we have. We have WaterWise house calls, so you could get a free water audit. They'll go in the ins and outs of your house's efficiency and if you have any leaks or anything like that. There's also a free smart irrigation controller program, which you can take advantage of as a customer. And for rebates, we have an ultra low flush toilet rebate, pressure reducing valve rebate, and high efficiency clothes washer rebate. So if you're interested in any of those, you can go to our website with the link down below right there. Or if you have any questions, call our water efficiency phone number, or you can email us at our water efficiency email. And without any further ado, I want to introduce our instructor for today, Bernadette Ballas.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to be talking about water savings in the landscape via hydrozoning and also having healthier plants. So I have a whole bunch of qualifications that all fall under the umbrella of the EPA WaterSense Professional, which is different programs to help get healthy landscapes and save water with efficient irrigation and healthy soil techniques and all of that. I work full-time for myself as a landscape designer, and the name of my business is Ecological Landscape Design. And I've been working as a designer with my own business for the last 22 years, serving the general greater Sacramento area, including Davis, Vacaville, and so on. So if you have any questions, we'll be taking them at the end. You can add them in the Q&A section. Please don't put them in the chat because they can get lost, and hoping you learned something today. So this is what we're planning to cover, what actually is a hydrozone and why we might use them, how to figure out what your hydrozones are in your yard, because some of them are a foregone conclusion. And the other one is to figure out how much your plants your plants might need to water as far as irrigation, and then also different ideas on how to actually do that irrigation. So hydrozoning basically means making sure your plants are grouped in a physical area that is on one zone of your irrigation system, or that you're able to manually water separately from other areas, and that all those plants in that group have the same water needs, as well as the same seasonal water needs. And I mention that because since we live in a Mediterranean climate, the plants that are most adapted to our climate are also used to having no water in the summertime, since it rarely rains around here. And part of the reason that it's really great to group plants by the same water requirements is that when we're working in our yards and we see some plant that needs water, we always tend to increase the irrigation to it because of that one plant that's looking sad, even though everybody around him might be looking just fine. So this is just a photo of a yard, and it's starting to illustrate different hydrozones. So as you can see, this is a space that's pretty wide open. There are some houses. but you can see that this lawn is one of the zones, hydrozones, and lawns, especially the cool season ones, the ones that look green both in the summer and in the winter time, tend to use the most water of all the different types of spaces in our yards. So that's at 80% of the possible water usage. Then over here we have a tree that's a moderate water user and some flowering plants, perennials that use moderate water. So that's a whole different zone. It's also, of course, surrounded by these walkways, and so very separate from the lawn area. And then the third area is this 40% water use, which means that this tree, I believe it's a locust, needs less water than the tree on the right, and the plants planted underneath it also need that same lower amount of water. And here's a California lilac, ceanothus, also that's a lower water use plant. So when you're planning a new garden or to renovate your landscape, you have the opportunity to actually create a plan that not only includes things like patios or hardscape decks, that kind of a thing, but you can also plan your irrigation ahead of time based on hydrozones. And this is something you would do before you created the planting plan. So in this situation, we can see that there's a little arrow that points to where the north is in this design. And that's pretty important because the amount of shade that an area gets also affects the irrigation and the hydrozoning. But let's keep it simple for now and say that right here we've got our veggie garden, which is going to be the high water use space. Over here we have a shady area, possibly with, or likely with a tree since it's planted. A lawn space, butterfly garden, transition meditation area, and a space where water can be captured and sunk into the ground before it goes off into the street. And here is your area with your driveway and a little bit of planting space around it. And these are all zoned, as you can see down here on the bottom, for different water usage. So the lawn or the veggie garden needs the most amount of water, so it's under the regular water usage here. The 3 times per month area is the lawn, which means that we've probably got not your typical lawn, but one that uses a little bit less water. And then the butterfly garden and the shade seeding, once a month watering. And then this meditation garden and your driveway area is rarely watered. And rarely can mean anything from twice a summer, for example, to make it really impressive, or a little more often, depending on other factors. Some of the other factors in the landscape that influence water use and then need to be taken into account when you're making your hydrozones are how much sun and shade a space might have, whether or not there's a section of your yard that gets a lot more wind. I mean, we have the north winds around here that can really dry out our space, as I'm sure you all know. If you have a sloped section, that usually needs to factor into your decisions about where to landscape. I know in the foothills, there's a lot of landscapes that have slightly, flatter front yard and then a nice steep backyard. And that steep backyard is going to need to have quite a few hydrozones to water it well for plant health. Raised beds and containers also have very different watering requirements than a plant that's planted in the ground and that can make nice big root systems. That's both because of the spaces are constrained and also because we tend to put very well draining soil in our raised beds and containers. And so the soil dries out more quickly. Other factors is the time of year, both because of the different seasonal changes and where the sun is and the intensity of the sun, and as well as the lack of rainfall in the summertime. But even taking into account the amount of rainfall and everything, we know it's hottest in July here, and that's when we and all our plants, need the most amount of water. The other thing that affects hydrozoning, so planting these different sections of your yard, is what irrigation type you're going to be using. And so, so basically they have different amounts of water that come out. Spray irrigation historically has put out a lot of water in a short amount of time. And so that needs to be the run times on your irrigation controller, or the length of time you have your lawn watering is, would be lower than if you were using a drip system, which usually puts out water much slower. So all of these things make it necessary to divide up your yard into very many different hydrozones in order to maximize plant health and also save as much water as you can. Assuming that everybody's on the boat, for saving water. It's a pretty good idea. Even if we have a rainy winter, it's still, the future is having less water available to all of us. So here's just breaking down a little bit more about the solar zones that affect hydrozones. The reason I'm adding this in is because it really affects plant selection too, because plants really vary, obviously, on whether they prefer to grow in shade or sun and all of that. And I'm sure all of us have, including me, have lost plants because we put them in a spot that they weren't happy in. So, when you're assessing your space, you do want to figure out where the north is, because all those north sides are the shadiest ones most of the year. Some of them can get blasted in the middle of summertime at the summer solstice. So it's good to really pay attention to these, shade patterns as they change over the year. And I would say that if you're planning in the future to do some landscape changes, that you spend a lot of time, even a whole entire year if you can, getting to know your property. This is particularly important if you're just moved into your brand new house and or new to you house, and you really aren't acquainted with how things work. It can save a lot of frustration and money in the long run when you're DIYing it. So any south-facing space gets the most sunlight, and that's true in the winter time in particular, as well as in the summertime. And then east-facing areas are typically the ones where it's the friendliest for a wide range of plants, as far as getting some shade from the afternoon sun. It's a great thing for them. And then west-facing is a place for all of our toughest plants. I'm a big fan of using California natives, and many of them are perfectly happy living in that west-facing sun. The other thing to pay attention to is, trees and houses that might be blocking space and creating kind of artificial shade and sun. And also the fact that if you're planting, in one of the health strips, like along your sidewalk, that's going to be even hotter than anywhere else in your yard. And those plants are going to need additional irrigation to make it through that time. And then these are just some of the changes that we notice, but we may not remark upon. But it's another nice thing to start paying attention to, what parts of your yard gets a little bit of winter sun, where the hottest parts are in the summer, all that kind of a thing. So here are the three main reasons to hydrozone. One is to reduce plant stress. So plants are more susceptible to diseases and pests when they are overwatered or underwatered. And for those of you who've been gardening for a while, you'll probably have noticed that the symptoms of overwatering and underwatering can be very similar. So that's why it's really helpful to get to know not exactly, but in general, how much water these plants actually need and what your irrigation system is giving them with every time it goes on. Most importantly for the water districts and myself as well is to save water. So if we can irrigate efficiently, we'll have healthier plants and also have lower water bills, which is pretty great. Have more water to share with everybody else. And then the other hydrozoning reason is, it really does help especially when you're designing a new landscape, to figure out where the different valves and the different zones in your irrigation are going to go. If you have existing landscape, and you're just thinking of making some renovations and not completely changing everything, this is some of my suggestions on how to go about that. Any plants that are super high maintenance, they never look great, you have to give them extra water where they are, they're way too big for the space, so you're constantly having to cut them back, prune them back, that kind of a thing. Those are good candidates for removal. We're really trying to end the days where we all try and grow hydrangeas here. And so, this is a good time to reassess that kind of a thing. Like, do I really want to keep down this conventional road, or do I really want to explore newer plants that are going to be truly happy in our Mediterranean climate? And then if you really don't like a plant, it's actually okay to take it out. Just because they aren't children. You will not have any bad karmic consequences for this. So yeah, just go ahead and do the editing. And then the other thing is trying to figure out like what the plants you have actually, how much water they actually need versus what you've been giving them. And then if you love buying plants as much as I do, you're going to be able to make a shopping list for new plants. So this is an example of a design that I'm working on with a client. And actually the picture before here is a section of this yard. So what we have here is an area of lawn, and then we have this space of raised beds that goes around the patio area. And then we have a planting area that's at ground level over here with some fairly established Chinese pistache trees already. And then an area up against the house that is shaded quite a bit by the house most of the year. So I didn't put the north arrow on, but the north arrow is at the top of the north is at the top of the page. So this section that my cursor is pointing to gets the most sun year round. So what I did is I took all of the little plants. Actually, my client took all of the plants, made a list of the plants, and then I went through based on their names and using some of the tools I'll be introducing you and classified them. So the ones that are colored in blue are low water use plants, and the green ones are moderate water use plants. So you can see we have a nice mixed zones everywhere. And one of my clients' goals was to have a more efficient, better irrigation system. And so I really wanted to take an inventory of what was going on before making any decisions on what to do. If you don't know how much the plants need, there's a really nice online database called WOOCLs. We'll get into it. There's also the classics like the Sunset Western Garden book. So if you know the names of the plants, then those can help you learn more about them, including their water needs. And if you don't know the names of the plants, you can often use some of the apps that are available for phones where you can, take a picture of the plant and it'll come up with suggestions on what it might be. So I've been living in this area almost my entire life, so I know a lot of the plants that are used. So I don't have actually that much experience with the apps. And if anyone wanted to chime in the chat about if they've used any of them and which ones they seem would be best, that could be a great resource to share with the rest of the crowd. So, okay, one way to do this system is to do this pictorial version, which really works for me. But there's also the chance to use, a worksheet, something like this, where you pick your area of the landscape and basically get all the data about the space to describe it. And that way it'll help you know what types of plants to shop for to fill in the blanks. It can also be a way to create a shopping list when you can fill in, for example, what height and width you need for the plant. Once you've figured out the hydrozones, what area is going to be low water need, you can write it down here and so on. And let me show you an example of a filled out one. So this is a space that's being worked on that's two areas, the backyard and along the property line. And it's showing what the function of the area is, what kind of soil it has, how much the hydrozone, which is what we're talking about today, the sun exposure, and any of the other factors that are involved. And here we're talking about, actually, this is all on one valve. So it's the backyard and along the property line. So it's going to be valve number 1, and it's going to use low volume drip. And then here are some of the plant choices that were being discovered. You can write them down and then fill out the data and see if it works. Like if the water needs here line up with the hydrozone. And if not, you can check it out and say, oh, I'm going to have to find a different plant. Even though I'm in love with this olive, it's not going to work for the space. You can also say, oh, it's going to get too wide for the space, so this isn't going to work. But in this case, this is actually a completed one where these are the plants that that will be used in this design. This is going to be a really helpful thing to have after the fact, because I've also done the thing where I've bought a plant and lost the tag and then can't remember exactly what it is as far as like how big it's expected to grow. So then you have a written record of it. So this is a little introduction to WCLS, which is the Water Use Classification of Landscape Plants. Not to go too far into it, but it's a database that was developed by different horticulturists throughout the state of California to start trying to figure out how to put different plants that we normally use in the landscapes into categories. And it was all based on our collective experience with using these plants over the years. It's also used as a basis for a state law called the Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, and that's why we needed kind of data for new houses and larger landscape remodels. The state actually defines the water budget available to each of those properties. And so we need this WCLS classification to fill out the paperwork and prove that the new landscape or renovated landscape actually fits within its plant budget. So this is online. Here is the website link, and these links will be added to the chat and also added to the website at the end of the day. But it's pretty neat because you can add in your city, and then it fine tunes the water use information based on where you live. Because believe it or not, coastal areas of California use the plants need less water because the temperatures are better, lower, milder. And so where you live actually affects how much water your plants are going to need too. But you can also use it rather than adding in a specific plant name. You could actually also sort the database for plants that use very low use plants, for example. And then you'll start getting this kind of information, and you can even make a list off of this database. So the other interesting thing about it is there are a lot of different, for example, butterfly bushes, what we're going to use. There's some different species, but there's also different cultivars that have been selected by plant breeders. And it turns out that the answer of how much water does a butterfly bush, the answer is it depends on which one. And there's a new-ish program through UC Extension, University of California Extension, that's actually testing a lot of the common landscape plants to say, well, we've been guessing or guesstimating all the time, but let's do a little scientific research to find out how much these plants actually need and how they look depending on how much water they're getting. So this WCLS database has been adding in the results of those experiments. These are 3 of the butterfly bush, buddleias, that are participated in the trial over the years. And as you can see, one needs a very low amount of water, and one needs a moderate amount of water, and one needs a high. So in some cases, this is true. It's not true about all plants, but that if you had your heart set on a butterfly bush and you wanted to keep your landscape low water use, or that hydrozone low water use, then you could, choose this purple splendor butterfly bush, for example, if it were the right size and color and all of that. Hope this is all making sense to you. This is a little part of the UC landscape irrigation plant trials. They do have a dedicated website to it, which was attacked by bots a few years ago, and they still haven't managed to repair it all. So Facebook is actually probably, if you use Facebook, is probably a better source of information on the newer plants that were involved, and photos and all kinds of stuff on there. This is a sample of the first page of some of the plants that have been tested over time. It says the trial year, shows the WCLS category that was that showed the plant performing the best. So what happens with this trial is they're planted in a low water regime, a moderate water regime, and a high water regime. And then all these horticultural professionals come out and rate their appearance in the spring, summer, and fall of each year. And that comes out with the overall appearance score, which is the mean OA score. So I kind of like this database. I use it as a designer because I can go through and compare a lot of plants. For example, abelias on this first list. One of them is a moderate water user and one's a low water user. And the low water user looked great. For a 4 and above is considered really nice performance. 2.5 is not very, that means it didn't look great at all. So, wow, I'm much happier to do a design with a low water using abelia that looks great all summer long and into the harsh, fall days of September, compared to an abelia that needs more water and doesn't look that great. So that's how I use this database. And there are hundreds of plants at this point. It's pretty interesting, and it's changing the way landscape designers do their work, because a lot of plants, it turns out, we were overwatering. So here's a little closer up of this, the little butterfly bush trios. And once again, on this, it shows that there are 3 butterfly bushes that did really well and got high ratings on their appearance. And once again, and this one, very close to doing really well, but you've got low, high, and moderate all available to you for your choice in which hydrozone, whatever hydrozone you're working on. So of course, buddleias are known for their blooms and all of that. So you're going to want a full sun location, that kind of a thing. And you're still going to need to look into the sizes. And this is where also the UC Landscape Irrigation Plant Trials is really great, because they have a summary. They talk about how well it did in the experiment, little notes, and it also has things like how wide and how big it's supposed to get, how wide and how big it got in just 2 years of growing during the trials. Because what they do is they plant the plants for a year, get them established, and then the second year they're evaluated, and then they're taken out and a new group is put in. So as you can see right here, after 2 years, this was already 6 feet wide compared to the 3 feet wide it was supposed to get according to the breeder. So there you go. But it's pretty nice. It has the flowering months, where to plant it, full sun, that kind of a thing. And so I find this very handy. So we've talked about assessing your plants in your existing landscape. The other thing that's great to map out is your irrigation. This is both like where the zones actually are physically in the yard, and then which zone corresponds to which one on your irrigation controller, if you have one. And then, you come to a little decision point in your existing landscape about whether or not you want to modify your irrigation system before, to be more water efficient, for example, by switching from spray to drip, or maybe from a more efficient drip system from one that may be very old or not watering evenly, that kind of a thing. So if you don't want to make big changes to your irrigation system, meaning digging things up and putting pipes underneath the ground and, reorganizing the whole yard, then you would want to stick with, like, for example, this blue area would be one hydrozone, and you would want to use all low water use plants there. This green one, you wouldn't necessarily have to keep the lawn. You could switch over from spray irrigation to drip, and then have you could actually keep it a high water use, but even better, switch it to another zone. Maybe if you needed some plants that you'd fallen in love with that need moderate water, that would be a great time to switch over that to a moderate too. But that's a way you can start figuring things out. This red zone is going to be the trickiest one to find plants, because it's up against the house. Best management practices actually say, it's better to leave about 2 feet clear from your house, clear of any plants or mulch. That's to prevent termite problems and home ant invasions. And if you live in an area that's at fire risk, which could be almost all of us in California, you actually want to leave a 5 foot wide zone. So in this, I might consider abandoning this section that's up against the house here, and not doing any plants there. So here we are back again into this factors in the landscape water use. And this is just a reminder that you've got both the plant water needs and then all the issues of your site. I would love to, anyway. So this is back to that original design where I had assessed the plant water uses. And this is going to try and walk through, what my solutions are to the space. So my client had already gone through and figured out which his favorite plants were and which ones could be taken out. So that's all in my head as well. But I also looked at, what is not going to be changed, like the low water use trees over here, and where the preponderance of medium and high water use plants were. So this area has 2 low water use trees, the Chinese pistache, as I mentioned already. And so I have to go with that. That's going to be a low water use area. And so some of these moderate water use plants, we're going to move into some raised half barrels because we need a little bit of a focal point over here. And some of them are going to be relocated to these raised bed area planters. And then some of the low water users are going to be moved over here. One thing I forgot to mention that I'll go back to on the buddleia is this particular one, which is the purple splendor buddleia. If you read the description, it actually says that it looked, that its appearance rating was good on all 4 of the treatments, meaning low water use, moderate water use, and high water use. So if you happen to have that plant, for example, already in your landscape and you knew that it was going to continue to perform well regardless of it, you could leave one of those purple splendor buddleias in here as well as over in the low water use area, and they would still thrive. So that gets into the nitty-gritty. You'd actually have to read each of the descriptions of the plants that you're interested in that UC Landscape Irrigation Plant Trial results on the Facebook page to get that info. Whew, a lot of detail, huh? So in this case, this area that's up against the house and quite a bit of shade, since it gets so much more shade in the winter, spring, and fall than any other part of the yard, even though it's low water use, I'm going to, recommend that this be on its own irrigation zone, so its own hydrozone. So there you have it on low water use plants here, low water use plants here, but they need to be on separate irrigation valves zones because they are distinctive because of their sun exposure. Even if all of the plants in the yard were low water use, I would still be recommending putting this section where the plants are in the ground on a different valve in a different hydrozone than the ones in these raised beds, because the water drains differently, acts differently in the raised beds than it does in the ground. The other thing to think about is, in these moments is you can still have a lawn, but perhaps use a lower water use lawn or a ground cover that can be walked on and used as a lawn. And it's also a chance to put subsurface drip irrigation in here and save even more water. So there's 2 ways to save water. There's the one to go with the lower water use plants, and 2, go with a more efficient irrigation system. And there are quite a few classes on the website, the Water District website, that go into the irrigation details. But let's talk a little more about water needs of plants. Oh, well, wasn't that exciting? My PowerPoint just shut, so let me open again, cross my fingers, find the slide. You can have a little hold music going, do, 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 do. And then presentation, slideshow, there. Oh, all kinds of technical difficulties. Sorry about that.
Bernadette, I think you had it there. You just had to swap the displays.
Yeah, I tried to move it and it didn't let
Yeah,
me.
when you click the swap displays button right there, up in the top left corner, right next.
Thank you.
Yes,
Did
perfect.
that during warm up and I still can't remember. Thank you.
No problem.
So back after our little intermission. So this is a mind-boggling chart for those of us who don't like charts. It has a heck of a lot of information. So this is based on the reference ET data that is provided by the state of California. There's a whole bunch of different weather stations all around the state that send over actual information on how much a 100% water use plant would need to look good all year round. The closest station to Citrus Heights is in Fair Oaks. And so this is historical data from historical data from the inception of CIMMYS on how much water in inches plants need in different months. So in total, in Citrus Heights area, plants or a plant that needed 100% of the available water to look great, which is a cool season fescue lawn that's immaculate. I've never seen one in real life, but they exist in the weather stations, would need 51 inches of water applied through irrigation. And in Carmichael, the average precipitation from 1991 to 2020 was almost 21 inches. So as you can see, in efforts to try and have the perfect, cool season lawn, we would need to put more than twice as much water than is available to us through the rainfall, not to mention our rainfall distribution, which we can also look at here. And you can see these numbers are inverted, right? As the year goes through and the days get hotter, the amount of water that the plants need gets larger, and the rain gets less and less. And July is the month where we had no rainfall and the plants need the most water, which means that's the month when we would need to be irrigating the most. And then there is a drop off on either side, spring into summer, into fall, of lessening water needs. And then in a normal rainfall year, there is no necessary irrigation. So that's this way across. And then this way is talking about the different types of plants. So if you're looking at drought tolerant and very low water plants that need 20% of the water that a cool season immaculate lawn would need, you can see that it needs only 5.4 extra inches of water compared to the cool season, the vegetable garden or cool season lawn that needs almost 30 inches of extra water. Pretty crazy. So the other thing to note here, so this is low water use or very low water use, moderate, and high water use, is that the very low and the low water use plants don't need to start being watered under normal conditions, normal year, average year, whatever that means, until May, whereas the moderate and high water users need to start getting irrigated in April. And I'm sure you've all heard of smart controllers before. Before the advent of smart controllers, when we just had irrigation controllers, our water consumption went through the roof. 60% more water was used because we weren't actually adjusting our controllers. And in California, Mediterranean climate, what we discovered is overall people were underwatering in the springtime and overwatering in the fall time. And so if you haven't changed over to a smart irrigation controller, and they're free through the water district right now, so I would grab one. The type that they're offering for free is a really good one. I just installed one at my house when my old one died, so highly recommend it. You know, if you're not going to go that route, then I would say, you know, keep an eye on making sure you're watering less in the fall, and making sure you start watering, you know, when it really, in April, May, you know, when things are getting hot. Don't wait till June. So those are a few of the bits of information here. Just really wanted to show you what a difference in water consumption there is. It's real savings, even between, you know, the high and moderate water user. And then it really drops down when you're looking at low and very low. But this also is showing the number of times that the water that you need to irrigate. So we're not only talking about how much water a low water use plant needs, but you also need to take into account that low and very low water use plants only need to be watered once a month at the most. And then, so when you're doing the hydrozones with your irrigation controller, that's another reason why you want to separate all these different zones out. There's no way, if the plantings are mixed, to water some, you know, turn on the controller once a month if you have moderate water user plants mixed in that need weekly watering. If you don't, this is a fun little thing. It's beyondthedrought.com. It's basically an online smart controller, so you can use it to play around and see like how accurate your own smart controller is, or you can use it if you don't have a smart controller or if you're hand watering. And you pick your city, and then you pick your plant choices and the type of irrigation you're doing, and then it creates a schedule for you. It sums up what you did for the zone: low water use, full sun, moderate wind, flat, clay, inline, and then it gives you this based on historical water use. So that's a fun way to play around with more information online. It'll also give you a time of use one, so you could go in and plug in your information. It'll say, today you need to water this much. Also keep in mind that any newly planted plants that are not established will need more water than their, you know, descriptions at maturity. And so keep that in mind. You might hand water some plants if you're adding some to the landscape. So even low water or drought tolerant plants fall into this category of needing more water. So to summarize, you're going to assess your plant water needs of the plants that you want to keep. Make a map of your irrigation zones, and then modify your irrigation as needed, keeping in mind that especially inline drip is a great way to save a lot of water. So it's not just changing out your plants, it's also improving the efficiency of your irrigation system. Take out plants, buy more plants, because I like buying more plants. And these are the references that are going to be listed. This book, if anyone still buys books, is kind of cool because it not only tells you what the water use of the plants is, but whether they're summer dry plants or not. So plants that prefer to not get irrigated or get very little irrigation in the summer. And so that's something that's missing from a lot of sources. Sunset Western Garden Book, they're not publishing it anymore. Oops, but you can still get a hold of copies used. And then these are the ones that I already mentioned. The last little one I'll mention is Calscape, which is a pretty cool thing from the California Native Plant Society. You can plug in your address and it will show plants that lived lived here before we got here and which ones would be happy to join your garden again. And it's divided into all kinds of shade plants, low water use, moderate water use, all that kind of thing, shrubs, trees. It's great. I love it. So now I think we can get on to questions.
Yes. So first off, thank you, Bernadette. That was great. And to start with questions, the first one we have is actually for us at the district. It's, are we planning to do a lawn removal rebate? At this time, we revisit that question a lot. At this time, we're not planning on doing one, but that will be something that we revisit, and we might do one in the future. It's just one of those things that we just haven't got traction yet with. So sorry about that, but no, not at this time. Bernadette, the next question is actually for you. The Trails Run site shows, does it show where you can purchase the plant? They Googled a specific plant, but they can't find it at Green Acres or Google. So do you have any suggestions on where they can purchase these plants on the list?
Yeah, that's missing. And part of it is that just what plants the nurseries grow changes. For that one, it's kind of complicated because there's been a lot of consolidation in the nurseries. But right now, a place called Verde Growers is the one that would carry this hind bud too. And you might want to Google it also as Buddleia Purple Splendor, because that might get you some different results. Sometimes this is the official patent name, the hind blood too, but it could actually be marketed under Purple Splendor, which sounds a little prettier. But there isn't a source that I know that can find that kind of thing. The nice thing about using Calscape, which I mentioned at the very end, is it does have a list of nurseries that typically grow that plant, and that can really help. But it doesn't mean that, you know, the nursery will have it in stock at that moment, but it's a hint of where to look. But that Calscape only covers California native plants. It doesn't cover Buddleias, which are from China.
Okay. And then there's another question. Where do fruit trees fall on the scale of water use?
That it depends. So let me just type really quickly.
Okay.
So I know Verde Growers has some retail sites in the area. I just can't remember what their names are because they changed hands so many times. The fruit trees, it depends. So one way for all plants to get a hint of where they might, how much water they might need, is tracing their origins, right, to what part of the globe they originated in. So if we go with that and we look for the fruit trees that originated in the Mediterranean basin, and this is getting a little nerdy, I know, but that can really help you figure it out. So fruit trees like pomegranates, figs, persimmons come from that area of the Middle East and the Mediterranean basin, and those are actually can be low water users. They will tend to produce a little more if you go into the moderate. And then some of the plants like cherry trees and apples and things like that, like moderate to high water use. You can play around a little bit with giving most fruit trees moderate water. You might decrease the yield, but for most people I know, except in the first couple of years of their fruit trees, they have too many fruit. So so that would be one way to go, is like, so the happy medium would be moderate. But you could also do your pomegranates, figs, persimmon type trees in a low water use zone and get fruit. So inline drip, let me see if I can go back and show a little picture here. Don't have a great picture of it, but these are the two types of drip systems. As you can see in this one, which is called point source, it has the drip emitter showing. So you actually punch it into the 1/2 inch line, and the water comes out of this emitter. And wherever you put an emitter is where the irrigation happens. Now, inline emitters they have the same 1/2 inch tubing, but they're actually manufactured integrated into the tubing. And these are by far the most durable and low maintenance versions of drip. They, except for, a few situations like container plantings, I use this almost exclusively. The other time I wouldn't use it is if I was doing a very sparse design with very few plants. But it is pretty much the industry standard for drip, and it's incredible. They have 20-year plus counting lives. And you don't get the same sort of things where the emitters popping up and getting clogged. It also waters very evenly through the landscape. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of it for sure. The name of the lilac in the first slide. Oh, you know what, Lizanne? I do not know the name of that lilac. I will say that there are a few lilacs now, if you look online, that have been bred to do a little better with lower water. The one that is for sure lower water is one that's called, oh my gosh, it's like lilac persicum. It's Asian lilac. It has Persian lilac. It has very tiny serrated leaves. The flowers are very similar to our classic lilac, but that one is really really hardy. And you could find that if you looked up Arboretum All-Stars, which is a list of UC Arboretum chosen plants that do really well in our Central Valley conditions. It is an Arboretum All-Star. So you could see pictures and get info about that plant from there.
Okay. I think this is the last question we have. Oh, actually, one more just came in. Oh, it was a thank you. Okay, last question we have now.
So yeah, if you have low and moderate plants together, as in the landscape plan, how do you not over or underwater them? That is the deal. So that landscape plan that I showed you, we're actually going to be moving plants around so that the moderate water users are all in one hydrozone and the low water users are all in the low water users are in the low water use hydrozone. So there really isn't a way to, especially if you're planting, plants close together, like most of us do, there is no way to not over or underwater them. The only workaround is to find something like that butterfly bush that performs well under, all different irrigation regimes, high, low, or moderate water use. But that's the deal, and the other thing is gardening takes a lot of observation. So this is basic information, but then you kind of need to get hands-on to get the truth, really inspect your plants, see how well they're doing, test the soil to see how much water is actually in your soil after you irrigate. You do want to be irrigating, at least 12 inches deep. That's where most roots are. And for trees, it's between 12 and 24 inches deep. You don't need to put it deeper than that. You can check the wetting patterns, but all of that involves kind of going out and poking around in your soil. You can either dig in there with a trowel, or you can use, in most cases, a long screwdriver will work, or some other type of stick like that, where if the ground is really dry, the screwdriver won't go in. If it's a wetter space, it'll go in. You can start seeing how deep the water is. So we're not 100% scientific because there's a lot of variables on irrigation. I'd really encourage you to watch some of the other irrigation webinars because they go into detail about all the details about irrigation. So there you go.
Yeah. Do we want to do one more and then cut it? Or
Oh yeah, I can do one more. Yeah. Is that okay with you, Jace?
yeah, definitely.
Okay. So Kristen asks, can you combine an inline system with a point drip plug for a mixed bed? You can add drip emitters to an inline system. Part of the beauty of an inline system is that if you know the spacing of the irrigation emitters and the spacing of the rows of half-inch plastic, then you could actually get a good sense of how much water is being applied to the landscape. And that will help you fine-tune your irrigation. So as soon as you start putting in point drip plugs, it becomes a lot harder to do those calculations. The other thing to keep in mind is, and we're getting into the weeds with irrigation, but the inline systems can work at a pretty high pressure. So 40 PSI is normal for those inline emitter systems, but a lot of the points, the emitters that you punch in can only work at a much lower pressure. And the other thing is there's a lot on the market that aren't pressure regulating, which means if you were to put one in near your valve, that one would put more water out than the one at the end of the valve. So basically you can add a few more, if you have a section where you've put your inline system down and you're not getting enough water there. Another option could be to put some laterals that connect the rows of inline emitters. So then you have the system being all the same, but getting a little extra water to those spots. But it's not a way to be able to mix zones, moderate and low water use plants because of this irrigation frequency issue that I mentioned, which is in here where low water use plants can be watered monthly and moderate need to be watered weekly. There's no getting around that if no matter what type of emitter you have, right? So that's it.
All right. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you Bernadette for presenting. I hope everybody enjoyed it and found it beneficial. We're going to cut it off there, and have a good rest of your day.